Don't fire my dad." The words didn't belong in a boardroom, but there they were floating in the thick air between oak-paneled walls and brushed steel light fixtures, trembling from the lips of a little girl in scuffed sneakers and a too-big dress. She stood at the threshold of the executive conference room on the 43rd floor of Ravelin Tower, one arm clutching a faded teddy bear, the other clenched into a fist at her side. Her dark curls clung to her damp forehead, her cheeks flushed not with fever, but with fire. At the far end of the room, a dozen suits turned in unison, startled by the interruption. One muttered a curse under his breath. Another chuckled awkwardly. A third adjusted his glasses like this was part of some offbeat employee appreciation stunt. But then she spoke again. "If you give me a chance, I'll heal you." The silence that followed was unnatural. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from being stunned or confused. It was the kind of silence that dares to laugh, until someone actually did. A sharp bark of amusement from the CFO seated nearest the door. It broke the room like glass shattering in a library. "Heal her," he scoffed. "What is this, a magic show?" More laughter, muted chuckles, a few glances toward the head of the table as if waiting for the woman in the wheelchair to call security. But Vivian Ravelin didn't move. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't even blinked. Her steely gaze was locked on the child, her fingers curled tightly around the wheels of her titanium chair. Across the room, Owen Blake sat frozen in his folding chair, white ID badge clipped awkwardly to the collar of his faded janitor uniform. His face had drained of color the moment his daughter entered the room. Now he rose slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might break the moment irreparably. "Ellie, sweetheart," he said. Voice tight, cracking. "You're not supposed to be here." But she didn't even look at him. Her eyes were on Vivian. Wide, honest, unafraid. Vivian leaned back slightly, studying her. Her voice, when it came, was low and precise. "You say you can heal me?" Ellie nodded once. A pause. Then, "What makes you think I'm broken?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The room went still again. No laughter now, just an uneasy tension, like everyone had realized they were suddenly extras in a scene far more intimate than they had signed up for. Ellie's lip trembled. Just barely. Then she said softer this time, because when people are broken inside, they forget how to smile. Vivian's jaw tensed. The glimmer of something sharp flashed in her eyes, but it wasn't anger. Not quite. Owen took a step forward. I am so sorry, Ms. Ravelin. She wasn't supposed to. She must have gotten lost. I'll take her out now." But Vivian raised a hand. Not to stop him, not to wave him away. To everyone's surprise, she turned to her board. "We'll reconvene in 30 minutes, without Mr. Blake." The suits hesitated. Vivian didn't repeat herself. They rose like a wave and exited in a quiet tide, shuffling out some still, muttering others glancing over their shoulders like they might be missing something that hadn't quite happened yet. And then, just like that, it was the three of them. Owen, Ellie, Vivian, the child, the janitor, the queen in the chair. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Vivian exhaled. A slow, measured breath. The kind you take before diving into water you once drowned in. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she asked Ellie. "You're the lady who wants to fire my dad," Ellie said simply. Vivian blinked. Owen looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. But the CEO didn't flinch. "And what makes you think he shouldn't be fired because he didn't leave work for fun?" Ellie said. "He left because I was sick. I had a fever. I couldn't breathe right. He stayed and sang to me all night." Her voice cracked slightly. Vivian watched her with an expression Owen couldn't read. "And the part about healing me?" Ellie hesitated, then walked forward. Slowly. Step by step, until she was standing just 2 feet away from Vivian's chair. She looked up and said with a terrifying softness, "Because I can feel your legs are still listening. They're just waiting for your heart to talk to them again." Owen's mouth parted slightly. He wanted to speak, needed to. but something in his chest refused to let the words out. Vivian swallowed. Her throat bobbed once. "Do you believe in miracles?" she asked Ellie. "No," Ellie said honestly. "I believe in people." Vivian looked down. Then she turned her head slowly toward Owen. "She's yours." Owen nodded. Vivian was silent for a beat. Then, 30 days, she said. "I'll hold the termination. No promises, no second chances." Owen blinked. "Ma'am, I'm not saying I believe in what your daughter just said, but I'd like to see what happens next." She looked at Ellie again. "And you?" "Whatever this is, I expect you to be consistent." Ellie straightened up. "I'm always consistent." Vivian's lips twitched, maybe almost a smile, but it never landed. "Then I suppose," she said, turning her chair toward the window, "we'll begin tomorrow." Owen reached for Ellie's hand. She took it. They turned to leave. But just before the doors closed behind them, Vivian said without turning around. She said, "I forgot how to smile." Owen paused. Vivian looked at the reflection of herself in the window, and somehow that hurt more than any diagnosis I've ever had. Silence, and then fade to black. "Let me tell you how we got here. 3 weeks earlier, Tuesday, 2:13 a.m. The thermostat blinked 72 degrees in soft blue digits on the wall, but Owen Blake knew better. His daughter's skin was on fire. She lay curled on their worn-out couch, cheeks flushed, strands of hair pasted to her temple with sweat. The little dinosaur blanket she adored so much was kicked halfway off. Her tiny fingers twitched restlessly, her breathing shallow and fast. Owen sat beside her, one calloused hand resting gently on her back, counting each breath like it was the only thing keeping the world from crumbling. 32 per minute. Too fast. He'd already called the pediatric nurse hotline twice. The first time they said to monitor. The second time they told him to prepare for the ER if things didn't stabilize. But Ellie hated hospitals, and if this was just another immune flare, if it could be calmed at home, he needed to try. The humidifier whirred softly from the corner. 2 empty children's Tylenol bottles sat on the coffee table next to a thermometer, a glass of half-melted ice water, and a stuffed bear with one missing eye. He'd never felt so useless in all his life. This wasn't like the battlefield or the rehab clinics he used to work in. Back then, pain had a protocol, a treatment plan, a team. Here, it was just him, and a little girl burning up on a $90 thrift store couch. "Come on, baby girl," he whispered, brushing a wet curl from her forehead. "You gotta fight a little longer, okay?" Ellie stirred. Her lips moved, but her voice was barely audible. "Butterflies." Owen leaned in. "What, sweetheart?" she mumbled again. "Butterflies. Have strong wings." He let out a breath that caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You sure do," he murmured. "The strongest wings I've ever seen." He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he held her hand and told her stories she loved about sunflower gardens in space and brave teddy bears who fixed the stars. Anything to keep her mind afloat, and his heart from sinking. Morning crept in reluctantly, dragging pale light through the cracked blinds. Owen blinked against the ache in his eyes and stood slowly, joints stiff, muscles locked from being curled up on the edge of the couch all night. He checked Ellie's temperature again. 101.3 degrees, down from 103.8. Relief nearly dropped him to his knees. She was going to be okay. But in the haze of adrenaline and fear, he had forgotten one crucial thing. His phone was on silent and blinking. 12 missed calls, 2 voicemails, 3 text messages, all from HR. He froze, swiped the screen open with trembling fingers. "Mr. Blake, this is your final notice regarding your absence. Please respond within the next hour, or you may be placed on internal leave review." Another message later. "You've been marked absent without formal approval for 3 consecutive days. Please report in person to HR for termination review." Owen stared at the screen. Breath knocked out of him like a punch to the ribs. 3 days. He'd meant to text, meant to call. But between ice baths, fever charts, humidifiers, and sheer panic. He never hit send, and now everything was slipping again. He looked down at Ellie, still sleeping, finally peaceful. Arms wrapped around Mr. Pickles, her beloved stuffed bear. Her cheeks were less flushed now, her breathing softer. "I'm not losing this job," he whispered more to himself than to anyone else. Not again. He turned toward the bedroom, grabbed the cleanest shirt he could find, and slid on his janitor uniform over it. It still smelled faintly of bleach and pine. He buttoned it quickly, then moved back to the couch. Gently, he scooped Ellie up into his arms. She stirred. "Daddy, just for a little while," he said. "I've got somewhere to go. You're coming with me." 30 minutes later, they were standing in front of the gleaming glass doors of Ravelin Industries, a 53-story monument of steel wealth and pressure. Owen walked through the lobby, one arm around Ellie, the other gripping her backpack. Every polished surface reflected his exhaustion, from the dark circles under his eyes to the wrinkle in his collar. The receptionists barely glanced up. Janitors weren't really seen here. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor, the facility's break room. He poured Ellie some juice from a vending machine bottle, laid her on the old leather couch in the corner, and kissed her forehead. "Stay right here, okay?" he said, kneeling beside her. "Daddy just has to talk to some people upstairs for a few minutes. I'll be back before you know it." Ellie frowned. "Will there be tall people?" He chuckled softly. "Very tall, with suits and fancy pens." She nodded, like this made sense. Owen hesitated, then walked to the elevator again and pressed for the top floor 43. As the doors slid shut behind him, Ellie stared at the buttons. She didn't know which floor he went to, but she'd seen the way he walked. Stiff, nervous. She could feel it. Something was wrong. 15 minutes later, Owen sat in the back corner of the boardroom, trying not to shrink into himself as the HR rep read from a bland sheet of paper about non-compliance and company accountability. His hands tightened around his knees. No one asked why he'd been absent. No one cared. And then the door burst open, and the story changed forever. Owen didn't remember standing. Didn't remember how the room turned to ice, how the laughter cut through him like broken glass, or how Vivian Ravelin's eyes found his with a quiet, piercing stillness that said, "You matter more than they see." He only remembered Ellie's voice. Strong, clear. "Don't fire my dad. I'll heal you." And in that moment, between disbelief and silence, mockery, and a miracle waiting to unfold, something broke open inside him. Not fear, not shame, but hope. Raw, impossible, and just beginning. It was supposed to be a normal Thursday. Just a quick meeting in and out, then back to mopping marble floors and scrubbing chrome elevators. Owen Blake had planned it to the minute drop Ellie at school, head upstairs, plead his case like a desperate man who'd already used up all his second chances, and hope that someone, anyone, still had a scrap of mercy left. But life doesn't wait for perfect timing. It throws you into the fire and watches to see if you remember how to breathe. That morning, Owen had packed Ellie's lunch with trembling hands, half a peanut butter sandwich and apple slices shaped into stars. But as he zipped up her worn little backpack, the phone buzzed with an unexpected message. "School closed today for emergency deep cleaning. Please keep your child home." He stared at the screen, his hands clenched. Not today. Not this day. He looked at Ellie, still curled up in her favorite blanket on the couch, pale but smiling, faintly clutching Mr. Pickles. "Hey, Starshine," he said, crouching next to her. "How about an adventure?" She blinked at him sleepily. "To the garden," he smiled. "Even better. A place with windows that touch the sky." Ravelin Industries was built like a fortress, gleaming cold to quiet in the mornings. Most kids would have been awestruck by the mirrored elevators or the 40-foot sculpture in the lobby. Not Ellie. She was more interested in the ficus tree by the coffee cart. "It looks like it's listening," she whispered, tilting her head. "To what?" "The building's heartbeat." Owen felt a pang in his chest. There was something in the way she said things, like she saw the world sideways, not broken, just different, more magical. "Listen, Ellie," he said, kneeling to her level. Daddy has to go upstairs for a bit. I need you to stay right here, okay? In this waiting area. See that couch? It's your explorer base. She squinted. What if the couch bites? He grinned. Then you tell it Mr. Pickles is trained in self-defense. She giggled, and for a moment everything felt okay. He kissed the top of her head, stood up, and walked toward the elevators, every step feeling like it might be the one that made the ground disappear. 15 minutes later, the boardroom on the 43rd floor was humming with tension. Owen sat across from 3 people in crisp suits. None of them looked up as he entered. One clicked through slides, another scribbled in a leather notebook. Vivian Ravelin wasn't there yet. Let's proceed, the HR director said flatly. Mr. Blake, you were absent for 3 consecutive shifts without formal documentation. As per company policy, this constitutes voluntary job abandonment, I called. Owen began. No voicemail was received, no time-stamped email, no medical certificate. My daughter was sick, he said, voice tight. She had a flare. I couldn't leave her alone. The man shrugged. We're not in the business of weighing personal crises against operational needs. The words landed like ice water, and then came the line that would replay in Owen's memory for weeks. This isn't personal, it's just protocol. But life doesn't care about protocol, especially not when it comes to children with wide eyes and even wider hearts. Ellie had waited on the couch for 7 full minutes. She counted them. Then she stood. She didn't know which floor her dad had gone to, but she'd seen the number 43 glowing when he stepped inside the elevator. So she pressed the button and rode up, hugging Mr. Pickles close, watching numbers light up like tiny promises. Ding. Floor 43. The hallway stretched long and silent. Everything smelled like lemon polish and nervous ambition. Ellie wandered softly, her shoes squeaking on the marble. She passed tall glass doors and intimidating signs: Executive Boardroom Legal Affairs, C-Suite Access Only. She didn't understand any of it, but she understood one thing. She heard her father's name, and someone said the word termination. So she pushed open the door without thinking. Every head in the room turned. Owen felt his soul crack in 2. Ellie, he gasped, standing up. She was out of breath, cheeks flushed, little hands still gripping Mr. Pickles like a knight held a sword. I'm sorry, she said quickly, glancing around. I know I shouldn't be here, but I need to say something. A pause. The kind of silence that follows a fire alarm, shocked, uncertain. Vivian Ravelin had just entered, pausing mid-step when she saw the girl. The girl looked at her. You're the lady from the big picture downstairs, Ellie said. You look sadder in real life. The room tensed. Vivian's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. My dad didn't leave his job. He left for me, Ellie said, voice trembling now, because I was sick, really sick. She looked around again. But that's not why I'm here. She pointed to Vivian, hand shaking. I want to help you. Someone snorted. Another coughed awkwardly. Vivian spoke for the first time. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Ellie took a step forward. If you don't fire my dad, I'll heal you. There it was. The sentence that would change everything. Not because of the words, but because of the silence that followed. You could hear the air conditioning hum. A pen drop. A breath held too long. And then laughter. Scattered, dismissive, disbelieving. But not from Vivian. She didn't laugh. She didn't speak. She just stared at the little girl in the too big hoodie and scuffed shoes. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something. Not pity, not annoyance, but something like a crack. A quiet rupture in a wall she'd spent 3 years building. Owen stepped forward, but Vivian raised her hand. 30 days, she said coldly. Mr. Blake, your termination is suspended for 30 days. Everyone looked at her. Even Vivian seemed surprised by her own words. If in that time she continued, voice flat but unreadable, I don't feel anything different. You're done. No appeals, no extensions. Owen opened his mouth, closed it again, then bowed his head. Thank you, he said quietly. Ellie smiled up at him, her fingers curling into his. And as they walked out of the room hand in hand, Vivian watched them go, eyes lingering on the little girl, on her words, and on the impossible idea that maybe, just maybe, healing didn't always wear a lab coat. Sometimes it wore pigtails, and carried a bear with one eye. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Vivian Ravelin last took a real breath, the kind that didn't feel filtered through glass and frost. 3 years since the accident. 3 years since her legs betrayed her, her fiancé vanished, and her world, once full of fire and thunder, narrowed into silence and steel. Now, everything about her life was precision. The wheelchair gliding soundlessly through white marble corridors, her schedule synchronized to the second, her boardroom voice smooth-clipped, merciless. They called her the Ice Queen of Ravelin Industries, not realizing she preferred that nickname to the far worse truth. She no longer knew how to feel. That afternoon, Vivian sat alone in her private office, surrounded by 6-foot-high glass walls and the dizzying skyline of Manhattan. Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, she didn't move. Her hands rested on the arms of her sleek black wheelchair fingers, unmoving, as if even they had forgotten the art of spontaneity. She stared at the large, abstract painting across from her desk. It was a cascade of reds and yellows, chaotic and bold. She hated it. She'd bought it on a whim after the accident, hoping its chaos would infect her stillness. It never did. Her assistant, Devon, knocked gently before entering. Board meeting adjourned. "Would you like your tea now, ma'am?" No, she rarely drank it. Devon hesitated. "The girl, Ellie, she left a drawing, said it was for you." Vivian turned slightly. "She left it on your desk." He placed a folded piece of crumpled construction paper in front of her. The edges were worn. The colors messy but vivid. Vivian didn't touch it. She merely unfolded the paper with a single finger. It was a picture of her, standing. Not just standing, flying. 2 massive, sun-colored wings extended from her back. Her arms were outstretched, and her face, though childishly drawn, was unmistakably hers. Smiling. Truly smiling. At the bottom corner in shaky block letters were the words, "You're not broken. Just forgotten. Ellie." Vivian stared. Something clenched in her chest. Not pain, not sorrow, just a weight she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It made her angry. Later that night, she sat in her penthouse, lights dimmed the city humming beneath her feet. The glass walls offered no comfort, only reflection. She replayed the moment in the boardroom again and again. That little girl, uninvited, unfiltered, had walked into the most intimidating space in the building and dared to make a promise no adult would ever say out loud. "I'll heal you." Ridiculous. Ludicrous. Absurd. Yet somehow it had landed deeper than any therapy session, any sterile report, any miracle treatment offered with cold hands and colder eyes. Ellie didn't offer statistics. She offered belief. And belief had been extinct in Vivian's world. She wheeled herself to the window. Below, headlights painted the streets like rivers of molten gold. She used to love riding at night, horseback under starlight. The wind in her face, the world stretching endlessly ahead, before the fall, before her spine shattered and left her stranded between who she was and who she never wanted to become. Back then, her days were filled with motion. Now they were filled with management. She hadn't cried in over a year, but tonight something burned behind her eyes, and she didn't blink it away. The next morning, Devon entered her office to find her already there early. More unusual than that. She had the drawing propped up on her desk, in a silver frame. Devon raised an eyebrow. Vivian noticed, but didn't look up from her tablet. "Tell security," she said. "Owen Blake and his daughter will be allowed daily access to the rooftop garden from now on." Devon frowned. "The garden's restricted." Vivian turned to him slowly. "So was my life," she said, voice like ice cracking. Then more softly, let's see what happens when we open a door instead of closing one. Later that day, Owen received the update in a simple email. He stared at the screen, rereading it like it might vanish. He looked at Ellie, who was busy drawing another picture on the kitchen table. "Ellie," he said gently, "you just got us 30 more days." She grinned, missing a front tooth. "That's long enough to grow a sunflower, Daddy." Owen blinked. He hadn't mentioned sunflowers. He hadn't mentioned anything. But somehow she knew exactly what needed to bloom. Vivian sat in her office watching the framed drawing every so often. Each time her eyes drifted to it, something loosened in her. Not everything was thawed. Not yet. But maybe. Just maybe. Ice could remember what it felt like to be water again. The rooftop garden of Ravelin Industries was the only place in the building where time felt slow. Tucked away above 43 floors of glass and ambition, it bloomed in defiance of everything below. Deadlines, spreadsheets, boardroom wars. Here, ivy crept along stone benches, roses flared defiantly in concrete planters, and wind chimes whispered to no one in particular. But today, for the first time in months, someone was listening. Vivian wheeled silently through the narrow gravel path, her sleek chair barely making a sound. She didn't know what she expected when she allowed them access, certainly not a moment of peace. Perhaps just a quiet curiosity. Or a chance to confirm that hope, like most things in life, was overrated. She found them at the far end near the sundial where the marigolds grew wild. Owen sat cross-legged on the edge of a stone bench, watching Ellie crouch down in the dirt, her little fingers busy tracing invisible patterns on a cracked tile. She was whispering to the flowers. Vivian hesitated behind a hedge of lavender. "She says they're sad today," Ellie murmured, eyes fixed on the yellow blooms, "because they think nobody notices when they try their best." Owen chuckled softly. "Flowers don't talk sunshine." Ellie looked up, maybe not with words. "But if you listen with your heart—" Her voice trailed off as she saw Vivian, and then, without fear or filter, she lit up. "Miss Vivian." "You came." Vivian nodded. "I said I would." "You didn't say that," Ellie corrected with a grin. "You just said we could come up here. That's not the same as you coming." Vivian raised an eyebrow. Noted. Owen stood. "Miss Ravelin, Vivian," she said quietly, "if we're going to be sharing garden space." He nodded once, surprised. Then, "Vivian." She glanced down. "I won't stay long." But she didn't leave. Instead, she watched Ellie, the way her small hands moved with wonder, the way she treated every weed like it was a wounded treasure. And then Ellie did something no one had done in 3 years. She rolled her drawing out from her little canvas bag, a new one still wet at the corners, and held it up to Vivian with both hands. "This is today," she said proudly. "You're here. So I drew you with your crown." Vivian blinked. "I don't wear a crown." Ellie tilted her head. "You do in here," she said, tapping her chest. "You just forgot." They sat in silence after that. Not an awkward one, a sacred one. Owen helped Ellie water the roses while Vivian watched. For the first time, she didn't feel like a statue being pitied. She felt present, Ellie. Owen said gently after a while, "It's time to head downstairs." 1 minute, Ellie called back, then turned to Vivian. "Can I show you something?" Vivian nodded. Ellie stepped forward, hesitant, respectful. She didn't touch. Not at first. She just looked at Vivian's legs. "Do they still dream?" Ellie asked softly. Vivian's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "Your legs. Do they still dream about running?" Vivian tried to answer. Failed. Tried again. "I don't know." Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes when something gets too quiet, it's not broken. It's just waiting to be remembered." And then slowly, gently, with a reverence no adult could fake, she reached out. Her tiny hand, warm from sunlight and lavender sap, rested gently on Vivian's knee. Vivian flinched, but didn't pull away. Because for a single breathless second, a heartbeat no more, she felt something. Not movement, not pain, but presence. A flicker, a flutter, as if the nerves long forgotten whispered, "We're still here." She closed her eyes. "Ellie, it's okay," the little girl said. "I won't tell them you felt it. Sometimes grown-ups get scared when hope shows up too soon." Vivian opened her eyes, searching the child's face. "How do you know all this?" Ellie shrugged. "I've been sick for a long time, so I've learned to talk to the parts of me that don't talk back." She turned to go, but before she did, she leaned close and whispered, "Your legs aren't angry at you. They're just sad because your heart forgot how to dance." That night, Vivian sat in her apartment in the dark. She stared at her legs. She moved her hand over them slowly like Ellie had. Nothing. But her chest ached, the kind of ache that only comes when the soul begins to thaw. She didn't cry, but she didn't look away either. 2 days later, a package arrived at Owen's modest apartment. No note, just a single hardcover book wrapped in linen. Ellie opened it. Inside, handwritten in perfect calligraphy, for Ellie. The Girl Who Speaks to Quiet Things. VR. The title of the book, The Garden That Remembered. Ellie hugged it to her chest. Owen looked at her heart heavy with questions. "She's listening now, Daddy," Ellie whispered. "Even if it's just a little." Owen knelt down. "And what do we do when someone starts to listen?" "We keep speaking gently," Ellie said, "until they remember who they are." The sun had barely broken through the haze when Owen Blake arrived at the Ravelin Penthouse Rehab Wing, an entire floor renovated not for opulence, but for privacy, for recovery, for silence. Vivian had requested him personally. He hadn't known what to expect when the call came from her assistant, only that her voice had been clipped formal, yet threaded with something else. Not hope, not quite, but maybe the absence of walls. Now, as Owen stood outside the physical therapy room, he smoothed the front of his worn navy shirt, the one Ellie called his lucky one. He wasn't a doctor anymore, not on paper, not with credentials, but in his hands still lived memory method muscle, and in his heart still lived the vow he once made beside a hospital bed to never leave when someone needed him most. The door opened, and there she was. Vivian Ravelin, CEO. Regal, even in a sweatshirt and athletic pants, her hair tied back in a clean braid. No makeup, no boardroom armor, just a woman in a wheelchair waiting to try. "Mr. Blake," she said not unkindly. "I assume you're punctual." He gave a quiet smile. Old habit. Combat field rehab didn't run on coffee breaks, nor do CEOs, she replied, then gestured. "Shall we?" He wheeled a cart toward her bands. Foam rollers, resistance balls, even a tiny speaker. She looked at it with mild suspicion. "I don't believe in yoga music," she said. "Good," Owen replied. "Neither do I, but Ellie made a playlist. Says it's for bones that forgot how to laugh." Vivian blinked then. Smirked. "Just barely. Let's begin." They started with basic stretches. Owen worked from a place of patience, guiding her through each motion with the precision of a craftsman, not a coach. He never pushed. He never flinched at her frustration. When Vivian's grip tightened with the pain of rediscovery, he simply said, "Pain doesn't mean you're breaking. It means your body remembers what it used to be." She swallowed. "And if I don't want to remember?" "Then we start small," he answered gently, adjusting her posture. Even memories can be rebuilt. The days blurred into a rhythm. Each afternoon, as the office emptied and the city's noise dimmed into distant car horns and rustling leaves, the rooftop rehab room filled with something neither of them expected: stillness and stories. Vivian, guarded as ever, spoke in rationed pieces. How she had been thrown from a horse during a training event. How the spinal injury didn't just shatter her bones, but her belief in people. How, since the accident, every connection felt like charity wrapped in guilt. "Everyone wanted to help me," she said one day, arms trembling from a stretch, but none of them stayed. Owen knelt beside her, checking her shoulder alignment. "That's the thing about staying," he said. "It's not glamorous. It's not headline-worthy. It's just quiet. And daily. She looked at him then. Not the uniform, not the former medic. Him. And something in her gaze softened like she finally saw the man who wasn't trying to fix her but simply willing to walk beside her. One afternoon, as the sun filtered gold through the window blinds, Vivian glanced at the empty hallway behind them. "Where's Ellie art class?" Owen replied. "She's working on a new piece for your wall." Vivian arched a brow. "Another sunflower with wings, no?" he said, smiling. "This one's called The Day the Ground Said Thank You." "I don't know what it means, but she says you'll get it." Vivian exhaled almost a laugh. That child. She believes everything has a voice. She believes everything deserves one. Silence stretched between them, warm and whole, and then Vivian said, barely above a whisper, "Do you know what I envy most about Ellie?" Owen waited. She walks into a room like she's not afraid to be small, like being little doesn't mean being powerless. Owen met her eyes. Because in her world, kindness is the biggest thing there is. Vivian turned away. "I used to think power was about control, and now—" She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she reached for the resistance band herself, hooked it over her shoe, pulled just enough to feel the stretch. Owen didn't guide her this time. He just watched. Because something had shifted. This wasn't about walking again. It was about choosing to try. That night, Ellie waited for Owen at home with a sketchbook in her lap. "I drew her dream today," she said, before he asked. "But this time it's not just her standing up." "Oh no," Owen asked, removing his boots. "Nope," Ellie said brightly. "She's dancing. But not like a ballerina. Like a sunflower that forgot it was rooted and suddenly realized it could still sway with the wind." He paused. "That's quite an image." Ellie shrugged. "Dreams are shy, Daddy, but when they know you're looking, they start to bloom." Owen leaned down, kissed the top of her head. And he knew Vivian Ravelin hadn't just begun a recovery. She'd begun a return. Not to who she used to be, but to someone softer, braver, someone who was finally learning. That healing doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, on the arm of a man who stayed. The conference room pulsed with tension. Vivian Ravelin sat at the head of the glass table, her sleek black suit as crisp as her tone. Behind her, sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Executives sat lined like statues' laptops, open charts glowing. The quarterly report wasn't terrible, but for Vivian, not terrible was the same as failure. She pressed her fingers together and narrowed her eyes. "We're bleeding potential, and no one here seems to notice until it's already in the red." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. The room tensed. No one dared respond. Across from her, the head of sales shifted in his seat. We were projecting Q4 to," Vivian raised a hand. "Don't project. Perform." Just as she reached for her laser pointer, something flickered in her vision. The room tilted just slightly like a camera lens pulling out of focus. She blinked, then blinked again. Her fingers went numb. She tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move the way she wanted. The room swayed, chairs dissolving into soft blur. Someone was talking, but their voice sounded underwater. She reached instinctively for the armrest of her wheelchair. Missed. And then she fell. The sound wasn't loud. A quiet thud, almost gentle. But it was the kind of silence that made the room freeze. The CEO of Ravelin Industries was lying on the floor, motionless. Papers fluttered off the table like birds startled from a tree. "Vivian," someone whispered. Panic followed like a rising tide. Phones fumbled. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted for security. By the time the emergency response team arrived, Vivian's lips had gone pale. A thin line of blood traced from the edge of her forehead where it hit the marble tile. Her breathing was shallow, eyes half open, unfocused. Downstairs, Owen was organizing storage bins when the elevator pinged behind him. The building's receptionist, wide-eyed and breathless, rushed toward him. "Mr. Blake! It's Vivian!" She collapsed. "They're taking her to Mass General now. The board asked if you could accompany her Ellie, too. Owen didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ellie's backpack, scooped her up, and ran. Inside, the ambulance monitors beeped steadily, almost cruel in their detachment. Owen sat on the bench seat, knees spread, Ellie cradled in his arms. Her face was pressed into his chest, but her eyes were wide open. "She looks like she's sleeping," Ellie whispered, voice trembling. Owen smoothed her hair back, his voice barely audible. "She's fighting, sweetheart. Even when it looks quiet, people can still be fighting, like Mommy did." His breath hitched. He hadn't expected the question, but of course she would ask. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, like Mommy did. Only this time, maybe we get to fight with her, not just for her." Ellie turned to look at Vivian's pale face. Her fingers clutched Owen's sleeve. "Can I help her, Daddy?" Owen looked at the paramedic, who offered a small nod. "ICU protocols are tight, but with special permission, maybe. The board's already called ahead." Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper. "I have to try." The hospital was cold in the way all hospitals are, sterile, humming with machines and heavy with the weight of too many unsaid prayers. Vivian lay in the intensive care unit, her body still hooked to wires, tubes, and silent hope. The doctor spoke softly, but the words were sharp. It was a severe vasovagal syncope triggered by overexertion and stress. She hit her head. "Swelling's minor, but she's in a light coma. We'll monitor for 48 hours. Is she going to wake up?" Owen asked. "We don't know yet. It's in her hands now." Owen looked through the glass at the woman who had terrified an entire corporate empire and whispered stories to his daughter on a rooftop garden. And now she was still. Smaller than ever. Behind him, Ellie clutched the drawing she'd made the day before Vivian, with sunflower wings standing tall and smiling. She pressed her forehead to the glass. "She's lost." Owen crouched beside her. "Then maybe you can help her find the way back." Ellie looked up. "Can I go in there?" The nurse hesitated, then spoke softly. "Just for a moment. But you'll need to be gentle." "Okay, I can be the gentlest," Ellie said. Inside the ICU, silence echoed louder than noise. Ellie climbed onto the chair beside Vivian's bed. Her small fingers reached for the woman's hand, cold but not lifeless. She didn't cry. Instead, she leaned in and began to talk. "Hi, it's Ellie again. Remember, from the garden I brought you your picture, the one with wings. You didn't hang it up yet, but that's okay. You were busy being brave." Vivian didn't move. Ellie continued. "You told me once that some flowers can't grow in hard places, but that's not true. Daddy said I grew. Even after Mommy went away, I think you can grow too." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny plastic sunflower. It had come from an old toy, half faded and missing a petal. Ellie placed it gently in Vivian's hand. "This one's special. It only turns toward people who remember where the sun is. So, if you wake up, maybe you can show it where to go." She laid her head gently on Vivian's arm and whispered, "Please come back." "You're not finished yet." Outside the room, Owen wiped his eyes. The nurse stepped beside him. "We'll watch closely tonight, but sometimes when science waits, love walks ahead." Owen looked back at the glass at his daughter curled beside a woman everyone thought was unbreakable, now broken but not gone. "She's not giving up," he said quietly. The nurse nodded. "Neither are we." As the monitors continued their rhythmic hum, a flicker crossed the screen. Barely noticeable. Vivian's fingers twitched, and just beneath the oxygen mask, the edge of her mouth curved softly like a dream chasing the sound of a child's voice. Ellie stirred in her chair, still asleep, and somewhere deep in the silence a journey home had begun. The ICU was still. Machines pulsed softly, monitors blinking their quiet codes. Outside the glass doors, nurses moved with practiced grace. Inside, time moved differently, slower, heavier, like the air itself held its breath. Ellie sat on a chair next to Vivian's bed, her small hand still resting atop the older woman's. Vivian hadn't stirred again since that flicker, that fleeting twitch of her fingers, but something had shifted. The nurses had seen it. Owen had seen it. And Ellie. Ellie believed it with all her might. She leaned forward again, resting her chin gently on the hospital sheet. "You don't have to be perfect. You know," she whispered, voice barely more than breath. "You can just be here." No reply, but her heart didn't waver. "You're allowed to be tired," she added. "Daddy says sometimes people get lost in the dark because no one told them it was okay to turn on a light." She reached for her drawing again, the one with the sunflower wings. "Remember this," she smiled. "You said it made you feel lighter." Ellie held the paper near Vivian's heart. Then, very gently, she placed both her hands small, warm, over the drawing and closed her eyes. "I don't know how to fix things like Daddy does," she said softly. "But I know what it's like to miss your mom. I know what it's like to want someone to stay." A pause. "And I know you're still in there." Then, almost like magic, the heart monitor beeped, not louder, not faster, but steadier. Ellie's eyes fluttered open. She watched breath caught in her throat. Vivian's eyelids twitched, and then they opened. Just a sliver. Owen, watching through the glass, stood frozen. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Inside, Vivian's lips parted dry and weak. "Ellie." The word came out like a rusted hinge, creaking open, but it came. Ellie's smile burst across her face like sunrise. "I'm here," she whispered, leaning closer. "You found the light." Vivian blinked slowly, her gaze cloudy, then sharpening slowly like a lens coming into focus. Her voice was barely audible. I heard you. In the dark. You were telling me stories." Ellie nodded, her eyes glistening. They were just little stories, but they had big hope. Vivian turned her head slightly, the movement small but significant. A tear slid down her cheek. "I wanted to stay." I didn't know how she whispered. Ellie took her hand again. "Then we'll teach you." Owen rushed in the moment the doctor gave the all-clear. He stopped at the foot of the bed, breath trembling. Vivian looked at him, eyes heavy with something far deeper than pain. "You didn't leave," she murmured. "No," he said quietly. "I don't walk away when it matters." She tried to smile, but her face winced with effort. Owen stepped closer. "Don't force anything. Just rest. You're safe now." "I don't remember falling," she said. "You don't need to," he replied. "What matters is you're here. You came back." Vivian's gaze drifted back to Ellie, who was now humming under her breath the same melody she'd once sung in the rooftop garden. It sounded like spring trying to bloom in winter. "I thought healing had to be loud," Vivian said. "Miraculous. Fireworks." Owen smiled. "Most healing is quiet. It sneaks up on you while you're still trying to survive." There was a long silence. Then Vivian whispered, "Will it last?" Owen looked at Ellie, then at her. "That's not the right question," he said. "The question is, will you choose it even when it's hard?" Vivian closed her eyes again, not in fatigue this time, but in contemplation. Then a nod. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped in her own body. She felt present. Not perfect, but alive. Over the next several days, the room began to change. Flowers came in, some from staff, some from strangers. A handmade card from the janitorial team said, "Thank you for remembering we're people too." Vivian read every note. She asked for fewer sedatives, more water. On the fourth day, she asked if Owen could help her sit up without the nurse. He was a physical therapist, Ellie informed the staff. Before the world got all messy. Vivian chuckled at that. "I could use someone who knows how to lift what's broken without making it feel broken." Owen just smiled. That's what dads do best. Each day, she grew a little stronger, and each day, Ellie came with new stories, new drawings, new questions. "Do sunflowers get tired of standing up straight?" she asked one morning. Vivian smiled. "Probably, but they still turn toward the sun." Ellie looked up at her. "That's what you're doing now." By the end of the week, Vivian was able to wiggle her toes. "I felt it," she gasped. Owen's eyes lit up. The nurse confirmed it. "You're starting to reconnect." Vivian looked down at her legs, still foreign in many ways, but no longer silent. "I thought they'd forgotten me." she whispered. Owen leaned in. They didn't forget. They just needed you to forgive them for falling apart. She closed her eyes, and this time her tears were quiet gratitude. On the 7th night, Owen walked to the window of her hospital room. Boston lights twinkled beyond sharp and brilliant. He turned back to her. "You're not the same woman who rolled into that boardroom a month ago." Vivian raised a brow. "Oh," he nodded. "You're softer, but stronger, kinder, braver." She looked at him for a long moment. "I thought power meant control," she said. "Now I think it means being seen, and still being loved." Owen stepped closer. "That's all any of us want," he said. Vivian looked over at Ellie asleep in the corner with a blanket half falling off her shoulder. "Tell me something honest," she said quietly. "Anything. If I hadn't fallen, if I had never broken, would we have still met like this?" Owen looked at her long and deep. "No," he said. Her eyes softened. "Would you have ever seen me?" "No," he repeated gently. "But maybe I wasn't supposed to see the CEO." He walked to her side. "Maybe I was supposed to see the woman, and she was supposed to fall, so she could rise again, not alone." Vivian closed her eyes one last time that night, but this time she was smiling, because for the first time in years, she knew she would rise. The news that Vivian Ravelin had awakened spread like wildfire. In boardrooms and break rooms, on message threads and news tickers, the headlines flashed, "Ravelin CEO stuns medical team after mysterious recovery." But inside the recovery suite on the 15th floor of St. Bartholomew's Rehabilitation Center, things were quieter, softer, more human. Vivian sat upright in her wheelchair, hair tucked back, hospital gown replaced by a dark green sweater Owen had brought her, the one Ellie said matched her eyes. "I still hate mirrors," Vivian said, adjusting the sleeves, "but I'm beginning to tolerate reflections." Owen knelt by her feet, gently adjusting the ankle straps of the assisted walking frame. He smiled without looking up. "You don't have to love what you see right away," he said. "You just have to stop apologizing to it." She looked down at him, surprised. "No one's ever said that to me." He glanced up. Then they weren't paying attention. Behind them, Ellie was placing flowers on the windowsill, humming a made-up tune about sunflowers growing muscles. Today was Vivian's first official day of physical therapy. 3 years of silence in her lower limbs, and yet she had insisted to start now, with Owen beside her. The physical therapist had offered alternatives, a dozen professionals with stellar resumes. Vivian shook her head at every one. "I only want him," she had said, looking directly at Owen. "He never once treated me like I was broken." The hallway outside the rehab gym was bright, lined with photos of patients who had taken their first steps after unimaginable odds. Owen wheeled Vivian into the room where parallel bars awaited. Ellie skipped ahead, holding up a sign she had made the night before. It read, "Step 1, you already showed up." Vivian let out a rare, full laugh. "I should hire her as my PR manager," she said, eyeing the sign. "She works for Hugs and Macaroni," Owen said, smirking. Vivian turned serious as she looked at the bars. "Okay," she exhaled. "Let's do this." Owen moved beside her. "We're not racing. We're just learning how to trust the ground again." Vivian nodded. "What if I fall?" He met her eyes. "Then we'll fall together and stand again." She placed her hands on the bars. Her arms trembled slightly. Her legs felt foreign, like she was borrowing someone else's body, but somewhere inside there was a flicker. One toe moved. Then the knee. A tiny shift. A tremble. A gasp. Then a step. Just one. But it was hers. Ellie clapped, tears running down her cheeks. "That's it. That's the sunflower move." Vivian exhaled like she'd been underwater and just found the surface. "Did you see that?" she asked Owen. Voice shaky. "I didn't imagine it, right?" He touched her hand. "No. You imagined it long before it happened and then made it real." Vivian's eyes welled up. "Why does that hurt so much?" she whispered. Owen's answer was quiet. Because every first step means you're leaving something behind. Over the next 2 weeks, Vivian showed up every morning. Ellie would sit with her art supplies in the corner sketching step charts with sunflowers for progress. Vivian nicknamed her Coach Ellie. Sometimes Owen told stories not about himself but about the soldiers he used to help walk again. How did they keep going? Vivian asked once during a break. They didn't, he answered. Not every day. But they let someone else believe for them until they could again. And who believed for you? She asked. He looked at Ellie. A girl who thought I could fix anything with duct tape and pancakes. Vivian smiled. She's not wrong. One morning, Vivian asked him more quietly, "Do you ever get tired of being strong for everyone?" Owen hesitated. "Every day." She paused. "So why do you keep doing it?" He looked at her more tenderly than he meant to. "Because someday someone might show up and do the same for me." Silence lingered between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was real. By week 3, Vivian was walking 15 steps between the bars. Still assisted, still shaky, but her steps carried a kind of stubborn grace, like someone relearning how to dance with gravity. One afternoon, Ellie brought a new drawing. Vivian was sitting on a bench catching her breath. Ellie handed it to her. "It's you." The picture showed Vivian in her business suit, but with her wheelchair transformed into a pair of golden wings. "I couldn't decide if you were walking or flying," Ellie said. "So I drew both." Vivian stared at the drawing. Her throat tightened. She turned to Owen. "You realize this child is undoing decades of therapy?" "I never had," she whispered. He smiled. "She's good at seeing people." Vivian looked back at Ellie, who was now organizing her colored pencils. "She's not just healing me," she said. "She's healing the version of me I buried." Owen's voice softened. "That's the part that's most worth saving." One rainy afternoon, as clouds rolled in over Boston, Vivian paused during her steps and looked out the wide rehab windows. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked suddenly. Owen thought for a moment. "I believe in choice, and I believe some choices lead us to the people we were always supposed to find." Vivian looked at him. "Even if we meet them in wheelchairs and janitor uniforms," he chuckled. "Especially then." She stared at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "Would you stay?" After all this, Owen tilted his head. "Stay," how Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Just stay." Owen took a breath, looked toward Ellie. "She's drawing a new picture," he said. "Give her time and she'll draw us all in it." Vivian closed her eyes, smiling. It wasn't a grin for the public or the smirk of the boardroom queen. It was soft, private, real. It was the smile of a woman who remembered what it felt like to be seen and not pitied, touched and not handled, believed in, even before she believed in herself. The CEO, who never smiled, had finally found her reason to. The ballroom shimmered under soft golden light, every crystal chandelier casting a warm glow that rippled across the sea of suited guests and velvet gowns. The crowd had gathered for the unveiling of Ravelin Industries' newest philanthropic venture, the Ellie Initiative, but no one knew what to expect. Vivian sat behind the stage, curtain hands folded in her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of something she hadn't carried in years, hope. Owen stood behind her, adjusting the support brace carefully strapped around her waist and legs. He didn't speak. He knew she didn't need pep talks, just presence. His silence had always said more than words. "You don't have to prove anything tonight," he finally murmured. Vivian turned her head slightly. "I'm not doing it to prove anything," she said, her voice steady. "I'm doing it because, for the first time in years, I want to walk towards something." From the far corner of the room, Ellie peeked behind the curtain wide-eyed. She wore a little navy dress that fluttered as she ran up to them, her crayon-streaked drawing clutched in hand. "I made you this," she whispered, holding up a new picture. It showed Vivian standing not in her wheelchair but upright with a sunflower in her hand and a golden ribbon around her wrist. At her side were Owen and Ellie, all three surrounded by tiny stars. Vivian stared at it. Then, slowly, she smiled. "You gave me back more than my legs, Ellie," she said. "You gave me the part of me I thought was lost forever." "Ready?" Owen asked quietly. Vivian nodded. The MC's voice echoed across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of Ravelin Industries, Miss Vivian Ravelin." There was polite applause scattered at first. Then the curtain drew back. The entire room froze. Vivian stood tall, her hands gripping the walker, each step calculated, slow, and deliberate. But she was walking on her own. Gasps rose, phones came out. But the moment was too raw, too sacred for most to record. Owen followed one step behind, not touching her, but ready if she faltered. Ellie stayed at the edge, eyes wide, with a kind of reverence only children understand. When Vivian reached the podium, she stopped, took a breath, and let her fingers rest on the edge. Then she looked out at the crowd, executives, reporters, board members, and strangers alike. "I was told healing would come from doctor's medicine or therapy." She began, her voice clear and unshaking. But none of them worked. "I spent 3 years waiting for something to save me. I thought I needed a miracle." She glanced down at Ellie, who grinned from the front row. "What I got wasn't a miracle in the traditional sense. It wasn't sudden or loud. It came quietly, in the form of a little girl who believed that broken things aren't the end. They're the beginning of something new." Murmurs swept the crowd. Some were crying. "This initiative we launched today," Vivian continued, "isn't just about rehabilitation or funding. It's about remembering what it means to feel human again, to be seen, heard, and maybe most importantly, believed in." She turned slightly to the side. "I was believed in by a janitor who refused to walk away when things got hard, by a father who chose love over pride, and by a child who saw my pain and chose to sit with it until I could stand again." Owen lowered his head, heart thudding. "Tonight, I don't just walk because my legs work," Vivian said. "I walk because I finally remembered who I am." Applause erupted, thunderous and long. Then Vivian raised her hand, quieting the room. "There's someone else who should be honored tonight. Someone who showed more courage than most adults I know." She gestured, and Ellie was gently ushered onto the stage. She blinked at the lights, then ran to Vivian, hugging her leg. "This," Vivian said with a soft smile, "is Ellie Blake. And this initiative carries her name not because she healed me, but because she reminded me that healing is possible." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes. "Does this mean you're not mad at Daddy anymore?" Vivian laughed through a catch in her throat. "No, sweet girl. Your daddy is one of the best people I've ever met." She turned to Owen, locking eyes. "And he's someone I hope never walks out of my life." Owen stepped forward, the lights catching the edges of his well-worn work boots. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, grateful, proud, and overwhelmed. Later that evening, when the ballroom had emptied and the camera crews packed away their gear, Vivian sat quietly in the garden terrace behind the venue. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and early spring. Owen joined her, a coffee in each hand. He offered one, and she took it without looking. "You really meant it," he said finally. "Everything you said." Vivian turned to him, eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "Every word." He took a sip, then exhaled. "I don't know what's ahead for any of us, but I do know. I don't want to go back to just sweeping floors and hiding in corners. You never were just a janitor, Owen," she said. "You were always more." She paused. "And I'd like to see what more looks like with you and Ellie." A quiet beat passed. Then from somewhere inside, Ellie's laughter rang out, bright, pure, untamed. Vivian leaned her head on Owen's shoulder. "I used to think walking again would be the miracle," she whispered. "But this is the real miracle." Owen looked at her, then toward the window where Ellie danced around with a paper crown someone had made her. He smiled. "Yeah," he said, "and I think we're just getting started." 3 months had passed since the night Vivian Ravelin walked across that stage. Boston had thawed into spring. The trees along Commonwealth Avenue bloomed again cautiously at first, like they were checking to see if the world was finally safe enough to soften. The same way Vivian had. Inside her townhouse, sunlight streamed through the windows, pooling across the wooden floors like warm syrup. A kettle hissed softly on the stove, and the faint scent of rosemary and cinnamon lingered in the air. Vivian stood in the middle of her home gym wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, not with judgment, but with quiet awe. Each morning she moved a little more confidently. Today she took 20 unassisted steps, and every single one was earned. Behind her, Owen stood silently, clipboard in hand. He still wore his faded work boots, but now his hands were often ink-streaked with sketches. New plans for rehabilitation tools, adjustments for Vivian's support equipment. He was helping her build a custom recovery suite for others who couldn't afford one. "You're overcorrecting your right knee," he said gently, stepping forward. "Try planting your foot softer. Trust the ground." Vivian smirked. "I've been fighting the ground for 3 years, Owen." He smiled. "I know, but maybe it's time to make peace with it." She paused. "I'm trying." A silence settled between them, not awkward, but full, like the pause before music changes key. Vivian turned to face him. "Do you ever wonder, if none of this had happened, if I hadn't gotten injured, if you hadn't started working here, where would we be?" Owen's eyes softened. "I don't ask those kinds of if questions," he said, "because they're always about the life we didn't live." He took a step closer, voice low. "But the life we did live brought me here, with you, with Ellie, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." She blinked fast, then turned away with a quiet laugh. "Careful, you're starting to sound like a poet." Owen shrugged. "I fix people for a living. Turns out sometimes that means stitching words too." Just then, from the hallway, a small voice shouted, "I'm done! Come see!" They both turned as Ellie burst into the room holding up a large sheet of paper with both hands. Her fingers were smudged with marker ink and her cheeks were pink with pride. "I finished the picture," she said breathlessly. "The one I told you about." "Want to see?" Vivian knelt carefully balancing without holding on to anything. Ellie flipped the drawing around. "It's called The House with the Door That's Always Open." Vivian stared. The picture showed a simple, cozy home with tall sunflowers lining the porch. A woman stood at the doorway, Vivian clearly with open arms. Beside her were Owen and Ellie. Above them, written in a child's careful handwriting, "Sometimes the heart walks before the legs do." Vivian felt the breath catch in her chest. Owen crouched beside her. "That's beautiful, kiddo." Ellie beamed. "It's our house, when we all live together. One day." Vivian looked at her. "Is that what you want?" Ellie nodded. "It already feels like that most days. Just without the sleepovers." Vivian laughed, but the sound was soft, almost shy. She looked up at Owen. "She's not wrong." He met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time to stop just walking toward something." He reached out slowly and touched her hand. "And start walking with someone." Vivian didn't answer right away. She stood still holding his hand. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "If I hadn't fallen that day, I would have never known what it's like to be caught by someone who stays." Owen stepped forward. "If you hadn't believed, I would have never had the chance to." From the window, Ellie called, "You guys, coming. I want to hang my picture on the front door." Vivian looked at Owen, eyes glinting. "No promises," she said. "No expectations," he replied. Just then, Ellie shouted again this time, laughing. "Hurry, it's spring. That means we walk together now." Vivian reached for her walker, then paused. Owen stepped beside her, offering his arm instead. She took it, and together they walked past the kitchen, past the ghosts of what once was, and out onto the front steps where the sun had finally found its way back in. The air smelled like beginnings. Ellie danced ahead barefoot on the grass, holding her picture like a flag. Vivian turned to Owen. "So, what exactly are we walking toward now?" He looked at her, not as a patient, not as a CEO, not even as a miracle, but as the woman he'd quietly fallen in love with. Home, he said. Whatever that means to us. She smiled. And this time it wasn't the tight, rehearsed smile of a woman who'd been taught to control every room. It was real, soft, whole, and it stretched all the way down to her steps. Not every miracle is about walking again. Some miracles are quieter, like learning to stay, like believing in someone, until they believe in themselves. And sometimes the most beautiful healing is simply choosing to walk beside each other. And now, dear listener, if you've made it this far, maybe you too believe in quiet miracles. The kind that don't shout, the kind that arrive when someone stays. Maybe you've walked beside someone through their healing, or maybe you're still learning how to walk through your own. Wherever you are, we'd love to hear from you. What part of the world are you listening from tonight? Whether it's sunny Florida, rainy Oregon, snowy Alberta, or somewhere across the globe. Drop a comment and let us know where your heart is tuning in from. And if this story moved you, if it stirred something deep, hit that subscribe button and join our storytelling family. We've got more stories just like this one. Stories about second chances quiet. Courage and love that walks slow but strong. Until next time. Thank you truly for spending this moment with us. And remember, some stories change the world. Others change one heart at a time. Let's keep walking together.